Welcome to another podcast with DIMS. My name is Vivek. I'm the managing director here at DIMS. And today we have a very special guest, Jake Lapke. Jake is the state coordinator for the state of Montana. Would you be accurately described as fairly new? A few months into the job, right? Uh, Welcome to the
Yeah,
podcast, Jake.
I think that's fair to say. Thanks for having me, Vivek. I appreciate it and happy to be here. And I really am thrilled about, this initiative of podcast and humanizing treatment courts from different facets. I think it's a brilliant idea, and I'm happy to be a part of it. So thanks for having me today.
Absolutely. So, with your experience of being a drug court coordinator for so many years, how many years was it?
Well, it's been 4 years.
Now you transitioned into being a state coordinator, right? And it's been a few months for you in the job. You bring a very interesting perspective to the whole thing, right? Very few people have been on this side and now on the other side. How do you feel?
Well, it's a tapestry of emotions and thoughts, and really still trying to get my footing in all of it. So, I would say, ask me in a year how
Right.
I feel.
So, you know, I'll get into the nitty gritty of this, right? You're a fiscal agent, and you're at the end of the day responsible for making sure that the budgets are in line, that everybody's doing their jobs, and all of those things. A lot of focus on dealing with legislative bodies, right? And end of year reports and all of those things. How do you think you're going to do with your first year of all of this coming up? I believe legislative sessions will start in early next year. You have the legislative report to do. And it's so, how do you see the budgets given the current situation in all the states with everything tightening up, anyways?
Yeah, with so much change, it's really hard to know,
Right.
what the effects of those are, right? And what that means. My new colleagues, how they interface in this work, and and the scope of it. So it's really hard to know at this point, just given my newness to it. Right now, I'm just trying to understand, the data, understand how to synthesize all this data, aggregate it, and then put it into a package for
Right.
the legislature in terms of here's what we do, here are the successes that we've encountered, and here's the taxpayer funds hard at work. And here's why we should continue that. I will have more clarity towards that. At this point, it's challenging. I think Montana is unique in that way, because our treatment courts, after the BJA funds are exhausted, are picked up by the legislature as a budgetary line item. And so we're lucky in that sense, that Montana doesn't have to continue to apply for grants and at risk of
Right.
losing some of those treatment courts. So we're unique, and I feel like we're very fortunate in that way.
No, absolutely. So it would be true to say that most of the state of Montana has a rural population, right? And I guess it must bring about some of its unique challenges. Could you talk a little bit about what it means to be rural and what those challenges are unique to the state?
So much of Montana is rural, and that makes it a challenge to make access to treatment courts equitable across the state. And so one thing that the state of Montana
Hmm.
we've been doing is trying to initiate a hub and spoke model of treatment courts and providing equitable access to treatment courts around the state. And what this looks like is a rural jurisdiction will apply for a treatment court in an adjacent county or an adjacent
Hmm.
judicial district that has a treatment court, and both jurisdictions, both courts will, they'll fill out the paperwork. Teams will meet and agree upon eligibility criteria and ensure that participant is eligible and fits the criteria of that local jurisdiction. but the participant will remain in their rural community, in their county, and receive testing supervision locally, but appear remotely to the treatment court in the adjacent jurisdiction. And so it really provides an opportunity for those participants to, remain in their community, continue to be employed in that
Right.
community, typically, with their family, with their kids, without that huge disruption of, potentially having to relocate and uproot their whole life.
Or travel hours, right? Like they could be easily driving 2, 3 hours one way to go be in a court. Has this hub and spoke model been
Right.
tried anywhere else, as per your knowledge?
Not to my knowledge. I'd be curious to know, and maybe you can help me
Right,
find those
right.
answers out. But I feel like it's a pretty innovative approach, especially for these rural states.
Yep, absolutely.
Mhm.
One question I'm sort of dying to ask is, when you were on the other side, I'm sure the former state coordinator, the very knowledgeable Jeff Kushner, was your coordinator, the state head of sorts. Uh, I'm sure there were things and times when you're like, oh man, if I was a state coordinator, I would not have done that, but I would have done this, and all of those things. And now, when you're on the other side, do you sort of have a feeling of, I think I know why he did it this way? How do you see those aspects playing out?
Yeah, those lenses are starkly different workflows and processes, right? And so it's challenging only
Uh
being
huh.
on one side and not really seeing the other side, and the rationale or the reasoning for what they're doing. Having been on both sides of the fence, it does provide more clarity, right, in terms of the decisions that were made by my predecessor Jeff, who is a great mentor to me now, and provides a lot of guidance. But having been a local coordinator and starting my court from implementation, you see a lot of the issues that now influence my strategic plan as statewide coordinator. You see some of the gaps, and you hear from coordinators about their concerns, about what shortcomings they have that now I can focus in on.
Right.
Primarily now, as I think a big overarching goal of mine is creating a standardized training program across the state and weaving that into the onboarding process with the state. And I think that will provide coordinators and jurisdictions
Right.
continuity in terms of how people are onboarded and that training. And hopefully that helps improve dynamics and outcomes.
No, absolutely. You have about 30 plus programs in Montana, and not so long ago, you were one of the peers. Now you're the boss. What does that look like? Do your peers from then, who now come under you of sorts, is it tough to gain their respect or their transition process? What does that feel like?
Look at myself as, this supervisor role. I view myself still as a coordinator, and at times I have to remind myself that I'm not coordinating or overseeing
Right.
one specific court. I do have a role shift, but it's a challenge. I miss that role, but I also am really delighted and honored at the job that I have now, because now I'm at a point where we see those gaps, those systematic issues, and have a new opportunity to be able to create meaningful change to that. And I hope that through my work
Hmm.
as a coordinator and identifying some of these systematic issues that we've faced as treatment coordinators, hopefully by targeting those issues, I will, earn the respect of my coordinators or my fellow coordinators in this new role. And so I try to look at what I'm doing through that coordinator lens and say, hey, is this something that's going to benefit
Right.
the other
Do
coordinators?
you see that, looking back, if as a state coordinator, when you make a decision, then you can quickly put the hat down, wear the court coordinator hat, and be like, how would I have responded to the same decision if I was on the other side? I imagine that's often to be played, and
Yeah,
that's an advantage to you, right? Because you can do that, unlike others who have not been in this role.
yeah, absolutely. And I think it is an advantage, but comes with its own crux as well. I feel like most statewide coordinators come from local coordinating positions, which I think is beneficial. But there's a steep learning curve to this other new role. It is and can be political and about relationship building, keeping a fine eye on the budgets and those
Right.
details.
You guys in Montana are lucky enough that, going back to the budgets a little bit, that when the BGA grant or the grant gets over, the state takes over from that. Is that not true for other programs in other states? And if not, what do they do? I mean, how do you survive, right? Do you keep going for grants after grants?
Yeah, I'm still kind of learning a lot about how different states operate. I was just on a call the other day with the statewide coordinator for Colorado and learning.
Is that Michael or Dorinda?
It was Desiree.
Desiree, yes. Okay.
Yeah, the unit manager, I believe, is what the title's called. Yeah, they and how they have incorporated staff into their roles, tied into these budgets, and really learning how starkly different some of the states are ran. And so, yeah, I think that some do have to continue to scrap and fight for grants, but with our state, each legislative term, there is a need to update the legislature in terms of what we do, and it's not to say that funding couldn't be in jeopardy. And I think it's determined on the political atmosphere, the stance of the legislature, the governor. Luckily, I think we have a governor's office who's very
Treatment
supportive
courts.
of treatment
Right.
courts, who's actively funded treatment courts. So I would like to think that we have bipartisan support, but those things can also change.
Right. So, getting into this a little bit, and of course, data being critical here, what sort of role do you see the data playing? Legislative report data that you produce, and all of those, number of graduates, number of people who did not graduate, referred, and a whole bunch of data points. How do you see that as playing a role when it comes to maintaining your funding with the legislator?
It's a huge role in that. The data is what we speak to into that report. And so if the data isn't accurate, if it doesn't match, there's discrepancies, it's hard to really report on what the landscape of outcomes by the treatment court is, right? And so that piece that I'm quickly learning is such a crucial piece,
So, would you
right?
say that
Hmm.
one of the more important pieces to them continuing to support treatment courts is seeing positive results, growth in graduation rates, and those come from the data? Is that what they're looking at and saying, okay, look, I guess it's I guess it's a way to justify public spend. If they can justify to the public on how the money spent is benefiting the community through the data. Is that accurate to say? Do you,
Absolutely.
yeah, do
Yeah.
you feel that the court coordinators or yourself when you were in that position truly grasp the gravity of that? Because they're one level away from that, right? So they don't really, I mean, you're working towards it, but they may not be.
Yeah, I think for me, I had a little bit more of a grasp on it because I started um, my previous court from the ground up. And so, developing relationships with team members,
Hmm.
those agencies, it was kind of like a pitch, right?
Yes.
To garner investment. And here's why
Hmm.
we're doing this. The $1 to $4 spending or the savings that as
Right.
taxpayers receive when participants coming into treatment court as opposed to DOC corrections um, is huge. And I think you want to win the hearts and minds. You talk dollars and cents. And so I think a big part of it was kind of that education, that pitch. And I think because I started that court from nothing, I had a little bit more awareness of it.
Yeah, I sometimes feel that, if I look at an organization, right, and the finance teams and the people who are responsible getting the sales in, if you're not part of that mix and you're working off doing something else, you don't really care about where the money is coming from. You are not privy to that information, or you may not care. So it becomes easier to say, oh, that's not my problem. But at the end of the day, everybody has to pitch in their part so that the money comes in. I think treatment courts are no different in that sense, that there are several people to be convinced on why someone should get the money.
The studies are there, right? You know as well as I do, the success rate of treatment courts with decrease in recidivism, um, decrease in reoccurrence rates of substance use. And so, the data is there, right? It's the most studied cross section of criminal justice there is. And so we're lucky to have that evidence to be able to show the legislature and the state and the community at large why this is important and why we spend this money and the cost savings that it provides all of us as taxpayers.
So, away from all the chaos and when you get some downtime, how would you evaluate the job your state is doing in addressing substance use, right? Uh, I go down to Nevada, and I-15 that comes right out of Mexico goes through Vegas up and towards the right. And A lot of the police officers and all of those people actually talk about the drug trafficking that occurs on I-15 through Vegas. My question is, Montana being so far away from all of this, why do you have such a big, concern with that? You're not a bordering state to Mexico.
Well, I think it's because of the nature of these new drugs and the lethality of them, right? Fentanyl came on the scene, and many of our neighbors and citizens have just dying in record numbers, and so that speaks to the importance of interdiction on these issues from many standpoints, from a
Right.
treatment standpoint, from a criminal justice standpoint, law enforcement standpoint. And, while we're not, a bordering state, we still get a lot of drug trafficking coming from Washington,
Got it.
and even seeing quite a bit of increased cartel presence within the state in our tribal communities.
Hmm.
And so this this is concerning.
Why is tribal communities proving to be such a big challenge? We hear, or I hear at least, that drug related deaths are on the rise in tribal communities, maybe even way more than communities outside of it. Any particular insight on that?
I think the camp of thought is that these are sovereign nations, and so the enforcement, the interdiction on some of these things is a little bit more complicated. It is not coordinated, and so the cartels, I think, have honed in on that as an avenue in which to um, flourish their business compared to outside of those areas.
I think a lot of our viewers who are not related to courts, and most of them visit courts to either get married or they have a parking ticket. It's very rare that you visit courts on a happy occasion, right? They may not understand what goes on here. My question to you is, what is prompting someone who, is in the community to take up fentanyl, or to take up uh, a substance use habit that is absolutely lethal to their existence, right? Like, it's a no-brainer. It's not one of those drugs where it's a hallucinogenic or something like that, right? It's basically, if you take it in a little bit larger quantities, you're dead. What do you think is pushing them towards that?
It's a pretty broad question, right? What spurs the nature of addiction?
But specific to
And
Montana, you being a coordinator, have you seen, the folks that are referred into your program? What is their backgrounds like? Why
mhm,
are they in this process?
I think a really reoccurring theme and underlying, is trauma, traumatic experiences in their life, family cycles of addiction, domestic violence, socioeconomic struggles, educational struggles, and maybe a history of. I think the opioid epidemic really,
Really messed with it. Yeah.
yeah, really, it really set the stage for fentanyl to come into the scene. And as big pharma started to ratchet down on that, it provided an opportunity for fentanyl to come in. And once that well ran dry for a lot of people of pharmaceuticals, OxyContin, those things, we saw that they went to heroin. And then I think the cartels realized that they could produce this a lot cheaper and more widely spread by just manufacturing fentanyl. And so I think that that was kind of the transition of it.
Right. Would you say that the opioid before the opioid crisis, the use of substances was not as prevalent, and that the opioids almost in a legal way, right? They were given to people in a legal way and hidden behind the mask of, oh, that's not addictive at all. uh, you say once they got out of that, the doc is not giving them any more prescription. They are now looking for other elements to give them the same level of feeling that an opioid would have given them. And here comes the fentanyls of the world and others, and then the cartels basically capitalizing on top of it and realizing that there's a market gap essentially to be filled out.
Yeah, yeah, it is. Very strategic in their efforts. We're talking about
Yes.
multi-billion
Yes.
dollar markets, right? With a lot of strategy and I guess marketing ploys on their end, and they got their finger on the pulse.
Absolutely.
We need to try to counteract that as best we can with our tools. And unfortunately, they have more money to throw at this than we do. But I think we can start locally.
You gotta fight the good fight.
Um,
Yep.
that's right.
If you just switching topics here, there are lots of things that we could do better as treatment providers, as court coordinators, and as people serving the population from the justice end. If you could address two deficiencies with the resources you have, what would that be in your term in Montana?
It's something that I see and hear a lot about. I don't know if it's definitely not within my control, but the Medicaid reimbursement rates for treatment are very low. And so, I think if providers were given, adequate funding and reimbursement for their services, we'd be able to see a lot more offerings. We'd be able to see more continuity in care.
What is the rate, Jake?
So
Do you
that's
know?
well, it depends on if it's like bundled billing, for like IOP groups. It's it's shockingly low. I don't want to butcher the number, but
Sure. Would you like to see that number increase by 50%, 20%, 100%? What are we talking about?
100%. Yeah, 50 to 100% for
It's that
sure.
low.
It's it's
Got it.
it's that low. Yeah, it's shockingly low. Another thing I think in my tenure would be to increase some staffing by the Office of Court Administrator to help develop and increase funding sources. I think funding is always a chief concern, an issue, and drives a lot of the decisions that are made. I think with increased staff, we can increase funding opportunities and increase sustainability and services to our courts.
So both of the points that you mentioned, money is the critical criteria here. Do you feel that one of the things that states lack is treatment providers not coming forward and providing affordable means of treatment because it doesn't make them that much money? Is that am I reading the situation right?
I think that's part of it, right? Is um, lack of services being provided because, where's that funding coming from? So, I think that that affects new and more dynamic approaches to treatment, because, if there's not a mechanism to fund that or a reimbursement opportunity for that, then they're
Got
not
it.
going to provide it. And because, you know, historically, um, these professions, and the reimbursement rates are so low, it provides lower pay scales for these professionals to do the work.
Right. So the talent coming into, can I compare this to the whole school teacher situation going on? Is because the teacher salaries are what, 30,000 at the moment, or less maybe. That's preventing
Yeah.
talent at a teacher level coming in to teach, and that causes its own set of issues. You would say that the doctors and the therapists that could make a lot more money in a different kind of practice do not show up to be licensed social workers and I wouldn't say psychologists but therapists basically, and in this field, and that's why there's a lack of talent pool available to treat these participants.
I think that's part of it. I wouldn't say that, in our cohort, there's not talented, dedicated professionals. I think that there are a lot of really educated,
Hmm.
and talented individuals in these roles, right? All I'm saying is that, our frontline workers, right? Our coordinators, our therapists, our teachers, all of individuals on the ground doing the work, are wearing so many hats, doing so many different roles, and the rate of pay is not commensurate with what they're doing.
I was talking to a few coordinators, and we never talk about the mental toll that this job takes on you, right? Because you are a human dealing with human problems on a very tragic scale at times, and surely it's very difficult to not take that home with you, especially when there's lack of funding and
Yeah.
others. So I can't imagine that being the mental toll that it takes on a person working in this field must be pretty high.
The secondary trauma is real, right? And it exists. And social work in this job, we put our blinders on, we do the work, we are focused in on that. We sometimes forget about the tolls that it has on us, and it comes out in weird ways. Um, but I think it's a constant reminder, that we need to engage in that. We need to be doing the things that we are, preaching or promoting to our participants, um, because of that effect that it has. Um, yeah, well, I was just listening, to a story the other day where, individuals had some difficulties, and just the extent of, um, their reoccurrence or challenges. The things that I was hearing, I almost needed to step outside for a minute and get some fresh air. Because it had just a very visceral effect on me. And so, yeah, I think it's crucially important, for this work, but just as humans, we none of us get out of this world unscathed, and um, it's challenging.
Yes. I Yeah, I remember hearing cases where mothers under the influence of drugs neglected their own babies, causing harm. Now, that kind of stuff doesn't leave you very, easily. I remember one of the coordinators in Billings. They had a court personnel that worked with them that was a former addict. They were addicted, substance use addiction, and they actually never got over it. She passed away because of addiction while employed in the treatment court. So it's like it's almost like a shadow, right, that never really leaves you. And most people don't understand the nature of addiction. um, I was watching the West Wing. I don't know if you've seen the famous show, but You've not seen it, right?
I haven't seen it, but I've heard of it. Yeah, I've heard good things.
Yeah, you heard of that, right? And one of the main folks, who works with the president, he's a former addict, and of course, this is all TV drama. But he goes and he talks about it, and he says, I don't feel like having one drink; I feel like having 26 drinks. So the ability to comprehend on a person who is not under the influence or is not addicted to substances, they just don't get it. Like they'll be like, oh yeah, just stop, right? And that dialogue from the show sticks with me because he says, I want to drink 26 drinks, not one drink.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about the stigmatization of addiction, right? And it's the only disease that we look down upon and say, why can't they just,
Stop. Right.
stop doing that, right? We don't say that to diabetic individuals
No.
who,
Oh, yeah, or someone who has fever, right? Like just get out of bed, just stop having fever, you're fine, you know
right? Yeah, exactly. Just take your insulin, um, go see the doctor, and we're going to try not to ostracize you when those things are
right.
dropped or missed, right? I think that there's been acknowledgement and light and progress towards. I think we've seen celebrities come to the forefront with addiction and mental health issues, which is I feel hopefully normalized this, but there's a lot of work that still needs to be done, right?
No, I see in my own family, my extended family, where they have now been going to therapy, not necessarily substance use therapy, just mental health therapy, right? And they're happy to talk about it. I don't think anybody in my father's generation would have even mentioned it. Like, what? You're going to therapy? Why are you talking about, like it was a very hush hush kind of looked down upon thing. And now it's like, look, I'm seeking help. And if you need help, so should you. It's something to talk about. Switching
Yeah,
topics a little bit,
yeah.
which is you know not controversial, but you know what we do is governed by policies and practices, and then there are judges who will do sometimes things that they just want to do, which may not be aligned with best practices, and we all have seen that. How do you get someone who you have no power over, in some cases is elected, no one can remove them, and they want to do what they want to do? How do you get them to be like, this does not look like a best practice to me?
Big challenge. Um, for all the reasons that you mentioned. They're the number one customer of the Office of Court Administrator. Um, yeah, but I think that it comes with potential collaboration and relationships. I think this is a very relational work, and so it's my approach that I try to garner a relationship with them and leverage that towards moving or guiding that judge back into best practice. But at the end of the day, right, they potentially heed that advice and make some adjustments or continue to do what they're going to do. And if it's not aligned with best practice, then my sense is that the court's going to have challenges in functioning.
I was watching Netflix the other day, and there's a Jerry Seinfeld show called Comedians with Cars Getting Coffee, and he's interviewing Barack Obama, of course, many years ago. And he asks Barack Obama,
Right.
if you were to compare politics to a sport, what kind of sport would it be? And the president thinks about it for a while, and then he says football. And the reason he gives is because he's like, with every play you come against the defensive line, and you get sometimes sacked, or you get 2 yards or 1 yard, but every now and
Mhm.
then you get an opening, and you got to maximize that opening, and you've got to go for it. You can't bungle it up then, because you don't get enough of it. Why I say that is because, do you feel that bringing judges into the fray is a lot like football, where you keep eroding at them, getting them tired, so that come the fourth quarter, you can make a big push and get them aligned to, once they're tired of listening to you, and you're not going to give up on certain things, and you keep coming against that defensive line of sorts.
Yeah, very much so, and that's is hopefully the result of building that relationship, and that does take time. Hopefully, you kind of provide some education to where uh, and what they recognize as beneficial to adjusting certain practices, and so yeah, it's that old Sisyphus story, right? Pushing the rock up the hill. And sometimes sometimes the rock rolls right over you, and sometimes you become a little stronger
Right.
from doing it. But every day is a new opportunity to continue to invest in the relationship that hopefully is going to sway or move that dial a little bit towards um, changing. We have an
Hmm.
advisory council that's
Okay.
consisted of judges to hopefully help additionally, influence some of the actions.
So you can reach out to them and be like, guys, there's something going on over here that needs some adjustment. Can you please help?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And the court administrator does a great job of also intervening in those moments to kind of preserve some of those relationships and not make it very adversarial. But I think it is their job to really reach out when there's issues and try to mediate those things. But yeah, I think that that metaphor of football applies to the treatment court world as well, for sure.
Well, thank you. Well, Jake, I think we've come to the end of our time. Thank you so much for being on the podcast. I think these are initial days for you. We wish you the best of luck. And I'm sure we'll have you on at some point, maybe in a few months, where we can dive a little bit deeper into what it feels like to truly cross over to the other side and deal with the problems that, didn't exist in your life before.
Yeah, look forward to it. Thanks for the time today, and yeah, I look forward to seeing the podcasts roll out. And good luck on your work. It's been a pleasure. Thanks.
No, thank you so much.